Well, in case you haven't been able to tell yet, finals are over for our college students, right? All of you clapping are not in college. It's funny because theoretically, right, this means a lot of things for our town. It means that theoretically traffic should be better. From what I heard about the bypass tonight, that was not necessarily the case. But it theoretically means, too, that all of those restaurants around campus that you avoid for most of the year, we can now go there and get a table, and we're excited about that. For Lakeway, us as a community, it means that this section is a lot emptier. It means that our attendance is a little bit down. Interestingly enough, our offering isn't down when the college kids are gone. I don't know why that's true. I can rag on them while they're not here. But this was finals week for our college students, and so Alex, my wife, decided earlier in the week that she was going to have some of the college girls from our church over to have a study night. So we had 8 or 9 college girls pack into our house. We fed them, and I very quickly learned what studying meant to 8 or 9 college girls. There was a lot of giggling, a lot of laughing, a lot of boy talk, not a whole lot of studying going on. But at one point, one of the college students, Sarah, who is on staff here as one of our assistant youth directors, she began to tell a story that captivated me, and I've been thinking a lot about this story, and Tommy's back there trying to think about what this story is. So she shows us an Instagram story. It's social media. I won't get into that. It's an Instagram story, and she says that this is one of her friends. And this friend was working at a little church camp thing up in Tyler this past week and knows she needed to get back to College Station to study and to take her exams and to do all of that preparation work. And so her friend gets in to her car, and she's going to head back from Tyler to College Station. So she does what college students do. Is she pulls out her phone, and she opens up the maps, and she types in her address, and it pops up that suggested address thing. She said, yeah, that's it. Clicks it, puts it on her little holster there, and gets to going on the road. And so a few hours into this drive, she knew it would be 2, 3, 4 hours from Tyler to College Station, but a few hours into the drive, she begins to think, none of this really looks familiar. She says it must just be because it's dark and I'm coming from a different direction. I've never seen this stuff before. And then she keeps driving, just waiting to finally see something that looked a little bit familiar. When lo and behold, she gets a call from her mother. And her mother was doing good motherly duties, hadn't heard from her daughter to check in, said, I made it home. And so her mom checks Find My Friends, the app, the creepy, Big Brother app that tracks your children. And she says, so the daughter picks up the phone. She says, hey, what's up? And the mother says, just quick question, a little bit minor. Why are you in Oklahoma? So this college girl had picked up her phone, picked up her maps, typed in her address, 123 Main Street. It popped up those suggested addresses, and she just thought, since that's her house, and she had put that address in many times, it'd be the first one. But it turns out that first address was the exact address, just with a far different zip code. So she ends up in Oklahoma when she's supposed to be in College Station. I didn't fully hear how that story ended out, but I'm sure it ended up okay. So why do I tell you that? I tell you that because it matters where we follow. And it matters what we're following. It matters who we're following. So many of us, we think that we're following the right direction. We think that we're following after Jesus. But if we're not careful and if we're not evaluating who am I following, we too can end up in some godforsaken place like Oklahoma. Right? But the reality is that we have to know that the direction we're going is absolutely true. We have to know that the Jesus we're following is the Jesus of the Bible, is the Jesus that we proclaim and that we sing. We have to make sure and reorient ourselves that that is our destination, or else we're going to get off track. A.W. Tozer, a famous Christian theologian, put it this way. He said, what comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And why is that true? It's true because what we think about God, who we think God is, will dictate the trajectory and the direction that we're going with our lives. With big decisions, with small decisions, with all decisions, what we think about God will dictate the direction that we're going. So what I've learned from talking to a lot of people is that we're okay with this idea of cute little Jesus in the manger and giving gifts, and then we're okay with Easter and eggs and bunnies and things like that. But for a lot of people, we think Jesus is just a really nice guy. That he's there to give us some peace in our hearts, some joy, some encouragement when we feel low. But the God of the Bible, the Jesus of the Bible, is not just a great guy, he's God. And so what I want us to look at together is the statements of Jesus relating to light, of how he points us to this truth, that he is God, and then how we can direct and orient ourselves to make sure we're following after that light. And to do that, we're going to look at John chapter 8. And to set this scene a little bit, Jesus begins speaking to these people in the temple. So we hear about Jesus speaking a lot in the temple, and I know in my mind, I think oftentimes this was where he'd go, right? He was a church guy, so he'd show up to church. But the reality is that when Jesus goes into a temple, that's kind of hostile territory for him, right? Because Jesus is going into this religious space, and generally he's preaching things that the people listening don't really like. And so they don't like that he's coming to church. They don't like that he's coming to temple. I tell you that because I know that some of us here, there's some family members, a spouse, a child, a parent, a coworker, a friend who maybe doesn't like that you're coming to church. Maybe doesn't like that you're doing this whole Jesus thing. If that is you, then you're in good company. Because people didn't want Jesus in the temple either. And so he goes in the temple and he sits and he starts to teach. And he teaches something that these people don't like too much. Verse 12 says this. Again, Jesus spoke to them and he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees, these were the righteous type, they said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. So your testimony is not true. They're essentially saying you're bragging and you don't have anybody to back it up. Your testimony is not true. They don't like what he's teaching. And Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true. For I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. What a confidence word right there. That Jesus speaks to someone else and says, you don't know my story. You don't know where I've been. You don't know where I'm going. Sometimes we need to speak that truth into other people's lives as well. You don't know where I'm coming from. You don't know where I'm going. But the Pharisees, they don't like this teaching. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, to us that just sounds like a nice little Jesus sentence, right? You stick it on your wall, you put some lights behind it, and it's a pretty little wall decoration. We think it just means that Jesus is saying, look, I am goodness, I am mercy, I am the light of the world. But what the Pharisees see here is that Jesus is saying something much more than that. He's not just making a statement that we can stick up on a wall. He's saying something about a deep truth of the universe. Because the Pharisees, the scribes, they were just more righteous than you. Right? No matter how righteous you think you are, the Pharisees were more righteous. They memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. They had that up here. Right? Everything they did, they were trying to live a perfect life. They were tithing off of their spices. They were doing everything they could to be righteous. And so when Jesus stands up and he says, I'm the light of the world, they've got Genesis in their mind. They know that in the first few passages of our Bible, God creates light. And so when Jesus says, I am the light, he's not just saying I am good. He's saying, I was there. Before anything existed, I was with God because I am God. The Pharisees thought that he was just some good teacher that was going to stand up and teach him lessons. They thought, think about it like this, they thought he was much like a moon reflecting the light. But what Jesus says is, I'm not the moon, I'm the sun. I'm the one producing the light. I am the light. I am co-eternal and co-equal with the Father. Jesus says, I am God. And that's why they don't like this. They say you can't be God because if they're honest, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes had done something that we're often tempted to do. They have made a Lord out of themselves. They trusted in their own righteousness. They thought, if I can be as close to God as I can, then he will love me. All I have to do is work, and then he will like me, and then I will finally feel good about myself. But what Jesus says is, don't be your own Lord, because I am your Lord. That's an audacious and that's an offensive statement. That's an offensive statement to a lot of people today. To say that Jesus Christ is Lord is to say that there is no other Lord. And Jesus stands in the temple and teaches them this. He's not just a good teacher. He's a good teacher and he's God. Which is why so often when I talk to people and they say, I can get on board with Jesus' teaching. I can get on board with his encouragement, with his joy, with his hope, with the stuff he taught about feeding the hungry, about healing the sick. I'm cool with all that stuff. But the whole God thing, I can't get on board with that. And to those people, I say very simply, either Jesus is God or he's a terrible moral teacher. Right? Because in statements like these, Jesus is very clearly saying, I am God. And so we can't believe that he's a good teacher if he's a liar. So the challenge then is that he can't just be a good teacher. He must be fully God or he must be nothing. So the question is, what are you following? Are you following that little God that's going to give you a little bit of encouragement here and there, how to treat some other people? Are you following the one who wants to be Lord over your life? I love that this time of year we get a story of some people that I wish we knew more about, but they tell us all about what it means to really follow the light. Only in Matthew's gospel are we introduced to the wise men, the magi, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding these characters. Because traditionally we're going to say there's 3 of them. We don't actually know how many there were. We guess 3 because they bring 3 gifts, so that's why we depict it that way. But we're told in Matthew 2, verse 1, it says that now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, that's important to remember, behold, wise men, magi, they came from the east. And they came to Jerusalem and they said, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. So we're not told much else biographically about these wise men. All we know is that they see a light, they see a star, and they begin to follow. Scholars have kind of agreed that from the east means that they traveled at least 400 miles. They were astrologers, they dreamed dreams, they interpreted dreams even in the Old Testament. And so what this meant is that they had a pretty heightened, elevated status in society. They would have had money. They probably would have had prestige. And so for them to see a light and to begin to walk means that they had to put a lot of things behind them. They had to put behind their dreams, their homes, maybe even their families to follow after this light that had begun to rise in the east. And so I wonder then, what do you think the wise men talked about, not only with each other, but in their own minds as they walked those 400 some odd miles? Do you think they wanted to give up? With my attention span, I can hardly last like 30 minutes doing one thing. That's why my sermons are generally 25, because else I'd get bored. But can you imagine walking for months and months and months, following after some light and dreaming some dream and believing that the King of the Jews is under this star? Could you imagine how crazy that would have been? But still they follow, still they follow, still they follow. And then the plot thickens in the coming verses because they go and they behold the King of Kings. And Herod says, I want to know where this baby is. I want to come and worship him. But we know that Herod doesn't want to come worship him at all. He sees Jesus as a threat to his power. Jesus always comes in as a threat to power. And so he says, I want to come worship him, but in reality, just a few verses later, he sends out a decree for all the children in this time, in this region, to be killed. So the wise men are warned in a dream not to go back, and so they defy Herod's orders. They're not just going to walk 400 miles. They're not just going to put everything behind him. They're going to have the most powerful man in the region actively looking to kill them. That's the kind of following that we are all called to. The kind of following that says, even when it gets hard, even when my family, when my friends are against me, even when I don't have the time or the ability or the energy to follow after the Lord, I know that my reward is going to be so much greater than the stuff that I'm in right now. That's exactly what the wise men did. And that's exactly what we're called to do, to follow even when it gets tough. Because I tell you from the stage all the time that following Jesus is not going to be easy. I would love to tell you that following Jesus means that all of your wildest dreams can come true, that you'll be rich beyond your wildest imagination, that everything in your family and in your house will be perfect. But for those of us who have walked with Jesus even for a day, know that that's not true. There's been seasons, there's been times in my own life where I've been tempted to doubt the glory of God, when I've been tempted to not follow after Jesus, but to follow after my own understanding. But time and time again, it's been revealed to me that if Jesus is Lord, he deserves my following, he deserves my life. I have finished a book this week that talked a little bit about Navy SEALs training. And what the Navy SEALs have to go up against to become Navy SEALs is just mind-boggling and just like makes you soar to even read about it. So what happens is that they go through this big, long training program to enter into the SEALs. And if they're accepted for this training program, that means that they have all of the physical attributes, all of the mental attributes, that they have been evaluated fully, and they can get to where they're going to go. And then they're sent off to a training called BUDS, which is Basic Underwater Demolition SEALs, which sounds like basket weaving, but it's a lot harder. And so they're shipped off to this BUDS training. For 3 weeks, they are oriented into what they're about to go through. And then it's 3 sets of 7 weeks of just grueling, painful, psychological and physical warfare against their body. They're told to go jump in an ocean that's ice cold, and then to jump out and roll in the sand, and then to jump back in the ocean, and then to jump back out and roll in the sand, and then start running and see how far they can go. And all throughout these months of training, when the difficulty gets so rough, they have a way out. The commanding officers will come to them almost on a daily basis and give them a way out. They'll offer them a warm blanket or a Snickers bar or a ride back home. And they say, all you have to do is ring this bell 3 times and it's over. 75% of the men who enter into this training ring that bell. And why is that? It's because in the difficulty of what they're going through, they realize that what they're fighting for isn't worth it in their minds. Now, I'm certainly not comparing being a Christian in America exactly to Navy SEALs training. Although if you want to get into cold water and be baptized tonight, let's go for it. We got a pool out there. But what I am saying is, just like the SEALs, we all have the ability to live Christian lives, to get through the training that this world is. But we have to be so convinced in our mind that Jesus Christ is Lord and that he is worth serving, that we won't let all the stuff of this world get us down and make us ring that bell. We have to be so convinced that he is who he says he is, the light of the world, that we will follow after him no matter what, even when it's hard, even when our hearts and the world says to do something else. Last week, we got a beautiful picture of this from a couple of members of our Lakeway community. I will not name them. One of them is not here tonight. But you might have seen it going around Facebook. I shared it on my own Facebook. But it was a picture from George H.W. Bush's funeral procession right over here by the library. And people had lined up to just get a glimpse of history, really, and to honor a really great man and president and husband and Christian. And all the people there really wanted to support him and honor him, except for one man. He wasn't the member of Lakeway. But he was there, and he was yelling. He was screaming some pretty angry, pretty evil. He had a sign at one point as well, just some bad stuff. And so this picture begins floating around on Facebook. It got, I think, almost 2,000 shares on the original post, over 5,000 likes. And it started off like this, she introduces what's happening and this man who was so angry. And then the post says this: well, do you know how this crowd of Aggies reacted? First, like good Aggies, we hissed. Loud hissing, y'all. For a while, we tried to ignore him, and the clown, he was dressed as a clown, didn't mention that, just got louder and louder and louder. And then 2 old grads, they quietly walked over and they stood in front of his sign. They just stood there. He yelled at them to move, and they didn't say a word, and slowly other Aggies joined them until the clown was surrounded, at which point he tried to move to a different spot. But everywhere he went, he was surrounded by silent Aggies. They didn't yell at him or throw things at him. Their quiet dignity was louder than his disrespectful rants, because you see, his screaming message got drowned out by basic human respect. I'd like to take out that last part, and his screaming got drowned out by Jesus in the flesh. by living the call that we all have to follow after his truth. I talked to one of these gentlemen, and he said, I had so much rage that I just wanted to scream, and I wanted to go up and react as I wanted to, but he said I didn't. That's what following Jesus is. It's saying, despite what my heart says, despite how much I want to sock this guy, I'm going to do what Jesus would call me to do. And these two men did. And then it got shared around that area. People began following after what they did. And then it got shared all over social media. Jesus being shown to those who needed him. That's what following Jesus is all about. And so the question tonight is, in your heart of hearts, is that the Jesus that you're following? Is Jesus Christ your Lord, or is he just a good teacher? Is he God of your life, of your finances, of your home, or is he just a good guy to give you encouragement every once in a while? The good news is that we are always given an opportunity to recommit. To say, Jesus, whatever it means for you to be Lord, to you to be light of my life, I want to follow after you. If it's for the first time or for the 100th time, Jesus is waiting for us to say, I'm following you. God, we thank you that